In many families, love is not absent, it is uneven. There is often a quiet child in the room who learns early how to disappear without leaving. Not because they are unloved, but because they are unnoticed. While praise flows easily toward one sibling, silence settles around another like a second skin. The undervalued sibling grows up fluent in observation. They notice tone shifts, they measure attention. They learn how to make themselves smaller so the family balance remains intact. This story is not about rivalry, it is about absence, about what happens when affirmation becomes conditional, and worth is something learned indirectly, through comparison lect or quiet emotional arithmetic. And long after childhood ends, the echo remains, not loud, but persistent. Recognition rarely arrives as a moment. It unfolds slowly, almost politely. The undervalued sibling does not wake up one day knowing they are less seen. They feel it first in pauses, in glances that move past them, in conversations that continue as if their words were never placed in the room. There is no dramatic neglect, no obvious cruelty, only patterns. Praise seems to land elsewhere more often. Disappointment seems to find them more easily. Achievements are acknowledged, but without weight. Mistakes linger longer than they should. In the beginning, the child assumes this is normal. Because children always do, they do not question the structure of love, they adapt to it. So they become observant. They notice which sibling is asked how their day was. They learn who is forgiven quickly. They track who is spoken about with pride when guests arrive. This awareness is not conscious. It is somatic. The body learns before the mind does. The child learns when to interrupt and when not to, when enthusiasm is welcomed and when it is quietly inconvenient. They learn how much space they are allowed to take without shifting the emotional atmosphere of the home. Often, they become easy. Not because life is easy, but because being unnoticed feels safer than being wrong. The undervalued sibling rarely names what is happening. There is no vocabulary for it yet. Instead, the feeling settles into something vague and self-directed. Maybe I am less interesting. Maybe I try too hard. Maybe I should need less. This is how recognition begins, not as anger, but as self-adjustment. They watch how attention moves through the family like a limited resource, and without being asked, they ration themselves. Silence becomes a skill. Independence becomes a quiet performance. Emotional self-containment is praised, even when it costs something unseen. Adults may describe this child as mature, self-sufficient, low maintenance. What is rarely acknowledged is the emotional labor required to become invisible without resentment. Inside something is forming, an internal map of worth drawn not by words but by contrast. The sibling who is favored becomes a reference point, not out of jealousy but out of necessity. Comparison becomes the only available mirror. And yet, the undervalued sibling often defends the family fiercely. They excuse the imbalance before anyone points it out. They become experts at minimizing their own perception. Because to recognize unfairness too early feels dangerous. It threatens belonging. So the recognition stays quiet, unfinished, unspoken. It lives in small moments, when their good news is met with distraction, when their distress is met with solutions instead of presence, when their personality is described as different, sensitive, or too much, while others are simply themselves. The child learns that love is not absent, but conditional. That attention must be earned, not assumed. That being seen requires usefulness, achievement, or emotional restraint. Over time, this recognition solidifies into a background belief, not loud enough to challenge, but constant enough to shape behavior. They stop asking before being refused. They anticipate needs without voicing their own. They develop a deep attunement to others because they learned early that their own emotional signals did not reliably summon care. This is not a story of neglect. It is a story of asymmetry, of growing up in a house where love existed but moved unevenly, where one learned to measure their value not by who they were, but by how little they disrupted the emotional economy of the family. And long before adulthood, the undervalued sibling understands something fundamental: that visibility is not guaranteed, and being loved does not always mean being seen. This recognition does not break them, but it shapes the lens through which everything else will later be interpreted, quietly, persistently. Undervaluation rarely springs from cruelty. It is often an echo of circumstances, stress, or unexamined patterns. Parents are not always aware that one child receives more affirmation, more attention, more emotional energy. They may be balancing work, grief, or their own unmet needs. And yet, the consequences ripple quietly through the household. Sometimes it begins with temperament. One child is easier to soothe, more outgoing, more naturally confident. The other is introspective, sensitive, or slower to express themselves. Without intending it, caregivers may favor the child whose needs are more visible or whose behavior aligns with cultural or familial ideals. Other times, the seeds are historical. A parent's own childhood wounds, neglect, conditional love. Sibling comparison can unconsciously shape how they interact with their children. Patterns repeat because they are familiar, not because they are fair. Economic and social pressures play a role too. Limited time, divided attention, and the stress of survival create conditions where noticing subtle needs becomes difficult. It is not negligence, but scarcity, a scarcity of emotional bandwidth, of uninterrupted presence, of patience. Cultural expectations also matter. Some families prize achievement, resilience, or extroversion. Some honor birth order or gender roles. In such frameworks, a quiet, introspective, or emotionally complex child may receive less praise, not because they are less loved, but because their gifts are less legible. The undervalued sibling internalizes these patterns before they can articulate them. They absorb more than they express. They learn which voices carry weight and which exist in the background. They sense which behaviors will elicit warmth and which will be ignored. This is why feelings of being less than often feel personal, even when the origins are systemic. The undervalued sibling does not yet have the language to understand context. They only know the rhythm of attention and the spaces where they do not belong. Families are ecosystems. No one action exists in isolation. A fleeting compliment for one child may unintentionally diminish the other. A bedtime story read aloud may unintentionally exclude a quieter child. Moments that seem neutral accumulate over years into a pattern the child cannot ignore. Parents are human, of course. They do not always see the disparities. They mean well, yet their good intentions do not erase the quiet inequity. The undervalued sibling becomes a silent witness to these patterns, learning adaptation and self-regulation long before conscious reflection. It is in these formative years that the blueprint for self-perception is etched. When one child is quietly overlooked, the mind and body record the experience as reality. Attention becomes a scarce commodity. Love becomes a measure that must be inferred. Recognition is optional rather than expected. By the time adolescence arrives, the sibling has often developed both resilience and caution. They are adept at anticipating reactions, navigating invisible rules, and suppressing disappointment. Yet alongside these skills lies a persistent question. Why do some hearts receive light more freely, while others learn to wait in shadow? The origins of undervaluation are complex, interwoven with intention and accident, culture and circumstance, temperament and historical echo. Understanding this is not an excuse for pain, but it is a map, a way to see that being undervalued rarely begins as a reflection of personal worth. It begins as a reflection of the family's rhythms, limitations, and inherited patterns. In this recognition, the sibling may glimpse a paradox. They are shaped by absence, yet they are not defined by it. They are molded by silence, yet that silence also teaches insight. From these beginnings, the story of undervaluation unfolds, not as blame, but as a quiet architecture of the psyche. The body remembers before the mind can name. A slight pause in attention, a delayed praise, a glance that lingers elsewhere, all register as data in a young nervous system. Over time, these patterns accumulate. The undervalued sibling grows attuned to the subtleties of approval, learning to anticipate it, ration it, and sometimes survive without it. Psychologists describe this as an early emotional imprint. The experiences of childhood, especially those that are inconsistent or conditional, affect the developing brain. Regions responsible for attachment, reward, and social cognition learn patterns of expectation. When affirmation is uneven, the child's internal world begins to adapt. Self-concept becomes conditional. Worth is linked less to intrinsic qualities than to behaviors that elicit attention. Achievement, compliance, and emotional containment are rewarded. Spontaneous expression is often met with ambivalence. The undervalued sibling learns that love is not guaranteed and attention must be earned. Attachment styles form in response. A child who perceives that their needs are only sometimes met may develop anxious tendencies, hypervigilance for cues of approval, or avoidant tendencies, turning inward to protect against disappointment. Both responses are strategies for navigating a world where emotional supply is unpredictable. This pattern extends beyond self-perception. Emotion regulation is shaped by early experiences of visibility. When their feelings are ignored or minimized, the undervalued sibling may suppress emotions to avoid burdening others, or they may oscillate between intense longing for recognition and quiet withdrawal. The nervous system, trained by years of subtle neglect, becomes skilled in anticipation, containment, and self-soothing. Interpersonal relationships carry echoes of this imprint. Friendships, romantic bonds, and workplace dynamics may unconsciously mirror family dynamics. The undervalued sibling might seek validation externally, defer to others' needs, or struggle to assert boundaries. Patterns formed in childhood repeat, often unnoticed, shaping adult emotional landscapes. Cognitive psychology also reveals how narrative forms in the undervalued mind. The sibling may tell themselves subtle stories of inadequacy. I must work harder to be seen. I am too sensitive. My contributions matter less. These narratives are not false, but partial. They reflect accumulated data, interpreted through a lens of imbalance. The mind translates uneven affection into rules for survival. Be careful. Be efficient. Be small. And yet within this imprint lies paradoxical richness, heightened empathy, acute observation, and deep emotional intelligence often emerge from the necessity of attunement. The undervalued sibling learns to read rooms, anticipate moods, and sense the unspoken. What was born from absence can evolve into profound perceptiveness. Neuroscience shows that such early experiences shape both neural pathways and hormonal responses. Cortisol spikes in response to subtle rejection. Oxytocin responses adapt to inconsistent warmth. The body encodes the story of undervaluation as deeply as the mind. By adulthood, the imprint has become both map and compass. The undervalued sibling navigates relationships and life with strategies honed in silence, careful attention, self-reliance, nuanced empathy. These are survival tools, but they can also become invisible weights. Understanding the imprint is not about blame. It is about recognition, seeing how experience molds expectation, how early patterns echo in thought, feeling, and body. And in this seeing, there is the first step toward conscious awareness. Because the psychological imprint, once recognized, is not fixed. It is a story written in neural pathways and habits, but it can be read differently, understood, and slowly reframed. The undervalued sibling carries both the shadow and the wisdom of being unseen, and the invitation is to meet both with gentle awareness. There is a quiet tension inside the undervalued sibling, a split between longing and self-protection. They want to be seen, they crave acknowledgement, and yet, they have learned that reaching for visibility can feel risky. This inner division is not deliberate, it is cultivated by years of subtle patterns, a glance overlooked, a voice that fades in comparison, a compliment reserved for another. The mind divides into two simultaneous truths: I matter and I am safer invisible. The heart beats in rhythm with both. Self-silencing becomes habitual. Words that might attract attention are softened or withheld. Feelings are contained. Ideas are carefully measured before being shared. It is a survival mechanism honed over childhood and adolescence, and often extended into adulthood. Yet suppression does not erase desire. It coexists with quiet longing. Moments of frustration arise, resentment at unfairness, jealousy at the ease of another's recognition, sorrow for the parts of oneself that go unnoticed. These emotions are intense but often unspoken, because expression may feel ungrateful or disruptive. Ambivalence grows. The undervalued sibling may feel guilt for wanting acknowledgement, fearing it betrays family loyalty or exposes a fracture too delicate to name. They may admire the favored sibling's ease while simultaneously resenting it. Love and frustration intertwine, impossible to separate, shaping a complex emotional landscape. This internal conflict also shapes identity. The undervalued sibling becomes highly attuned to external cues, sensitive to others' moods, and skilled in reading unspoken rules. They are generous, empathic, and perceptive, but often at the expense of their own needs. Authenticity competes with survival, expression competes with restraint. In relationships outside the family, the split manifests subtly. They may hesitate to assert themselves. They may defer too readily or accommodate excessively. Or they may swing between overachievement and withdrawal, seeking validation while fearing its instability. Their internal voice constantly negotiates: how much can I be without being too much? The inner split is not simply conflict, it is paradoxical intelligence. The undervalued sibling learns nuance, emotional strategy, and empathy. They understand the fragility of human attention and the economy of care. Yet the cost is enduring tension between self-expression and self-protection. This tension can also take the form of quiet self-criticism. They interpret missteps as proof of their marginalization. They may wonder if their natural temperament, sensitivity, introversion, thoughtfulness is inherently less valuable. The inner split becomes a lens the world is filtered through, a measure of, am I enough? And sometimes, the split fosters resilience. They develop patience, reflection, and deep awareness. But even resilience carries shadows: restlessness, subtle anxiety, and the haunting sense of conditional acceptance. This chapter is not about blame. It is about the invisible architecture of inner life shaped by repeated patterns of undervaluation. It is about understanding the psychic cost of adapting to invisibility and the duality that accompanies long-term emotional neglect. The inner split is a silent companion. It whispers both caution and desire. It teaches strategy and self-reliance. It mirrors the child's earliest lessons, that love is sometimes uneven, that attention is scarce, and that survival often requires careful negotiation with the self. In recognizing this fracture, the undervalued sibling begins to see the paradox within. The same experience that divides the self also cultivates deep insight, empathy, and emotional acuity. The inner split is not weakness, it is an intricate map of adaptation, waiting to be understood. The moment of seeing rarely arrives with fanfare. It is subtle, almost imperceptible. A conversation, a reflection, a memory that surfaces, or an observation that finally lands. These are the cracks through which clarity enters. The undervalued sibling begins to notice patterns they once accepted as normal. They remember how attention shifted, how words lingered unequally, how affection sometimes arrived selectively. not as accusation, but as recognition. The family rhythm, once unconscious, becomes visible. Sometimes it is triggered by external mirrors, a friend who praises them freely, a partner who notices without comparison, a therapist who names what was unspoken. Other times it arises internally, a late-night reflection, a journal entry, or the quiet realization that patterns of self-doubt stretch beyond family walls. And in that moment, a profound paradox emerges. The undervalued sibling sees both the absence and the love. They understand that the inequity was rarely intentional. Parents are fallible, circumstances were imperfect, and yet the patterns left undeniable marks. Recognition does not erase emotion. There is sadness, sometimes grief, sometimes lingering resentment. There is mourning for the childhood they would have preferred, one where visibility was given without calculation. But there is also relief, a lifting of confusion. They no longer need to puzzle over every glance or measure every word. This awareness transforms the internal landscape. The self that had been shaped by conditional affirmation begins to disentangle from it. Worth is seen not solely in comparison to another sibling, but as inherent. The nervous system, trained for vigilance, begins to relax, at least slightly. Patterns are acknowledged, not condemned. The moment of seeing also illuminates resilience. The undervalued sibling recognizes how adaptation, observation, and empathy were cultivated by necessity. Skills born from invisibility, sensitivity, patience, attunement, become visible themselves, appreciated for their intrinsic value. There is an understanding that identity need not be defined by past undervaluation. Recognition of systemic patterns allows one to reclaim authorship of self-perception. It is no longer a question of competing for attention or striving to be noticed. Visibility becomes a choice, rather than a requirement for validation. Sometimes this seeing is gradual, a series of small realizations, an interaction that doesn't trigger fear, a thought that challenges self-criticism, build into a broader understanding. Other times it is sudden, almost startling, like sunlight breaking through clouds long held over the psyche. Crucially, this clarity is accompanied by compassion, for themselves and for others. The undervalued sibling begins to understand the human limitations that shape their experience. They see that love can be flawed, and care can be uneven, without diminishing their worth. This turning point is not about erasing the past. It is about holding it clearly. It is about seeing the pattern, naming it, and creating space to inhabit one's own emotional truth. And in that moment, a quiet liberation arises, not dramatic or performative, but deep, soft, persistent. They see themselves as they always were, and as they are becoming, a person whose presence matters, whose voice deserves to be heard, and whose emotional depth is a gift, not a deficit. The moment of seeing is simple in description, but profound in impact. It is the first step in untangling years of internalized patterns and the doorway to healing that is self-aware, patient, and ultimately gentle. Rewriting the bond begins quietly, within the mind and body. It is not about changing others. It is about changing the relationship with oneself. The undervalued sibling begins to see that their value does not hinge on attention received or withheld. Recognition can be external, but it no longer dictates internal certainty. This process often starts with small acts of acknowledgement, naming feelings aloud, writing memories without judgment, allowing oneself to grieve what was absent and to cherish what was present. Each gesture reorients the internal narrative from scarcity toward sufficiency. The sibling also begins to redefine relationships. Family dynamics remain complex, but understanding the roots of imbalance allows space for compassion without surrender. They learn that appreciation, though sometimes uneven, is not the measure of worth. Love can be flawed, and yet genuine connection remains possible. Boundaries become a central practice. The undervalued sibling recognizes when interactions replicate old patterns of invisibility or dismissal. They learn to engage fully without self-erasure. This is not rebellion, it is self-preservation woven with clarity. It is the act of saying silently, "I exist on my own terms." Integration extends beyond family. In friendships, partnerships, and professional spaces, the patterns of undervaluation may still echo. Yet the sibling now interprets them with context, not with automatic self-blame. They navigate attention, validation, and expectation with conscious choice rather than reflexive compliance. Therapeutic insight often facilitates this process. Psychologists and counselors provide language, frameworks, and mirrors that clarify unconscious dynamics. But the true work lies within the steady, patient observation of one's own thoughts, feelings, and reactions. It is the reclamation of emotional autonomy. Rewriting the bond also includes gratitude for the nuanced strengths cultivated in invisibility. The sibling recognizes empathy, attentiveness, resilience, and emotional literacy as gifts rather than compensations. These qualities, once survival tools, now enrich relationships and personal identity. Forgiveness of self, of parents, of circumstance often emerges gradually. It is not a mandatory absolution, nor a denial of hurt. It is the gentle release of tension created by long-held patterns, a choice to inhabit the present without carrying undue weight from the past. Over time, the undervalued sibling experiences a subtle but profound shift. They are visible to themselves first. Validation is not external, it is felt internally, steady and resilient. The comparison that once defined them becomes a reference, not a ruler. The emotional economy of childhood no longer dictates their self-worth. Healing in this chapter is relational, but fundamentally autonomous. They may seek reconciliation, or they may simply adjust perception. Either path honors the self without erasing history. Integration is the gentle weaving of past and present into a coherent sense of being. In these moments, life begins to feel less like survival and more like presence. The undervalued sibling learns to inhabit space fully, to speak without fear of dismissal, to allow needs to be known. They learn that being seen is not a reward, it is a natural right of existence. The rewriting of the bond is ongoing, patient, and quiet. It is not dramatic. It is a series of small, conscious choices to honor selfhood, recognize legacy, and embrace emotional wholeness. The sibling comes to understand a profound truth. Their history shaped them, but it does not define them. They are both the child who adapted and the adult who chooses differently, and in that choice, they begin to live with awareness, integrity, and gentle authority over their own inner world. What remains after years of invisibility is not emptiness. It is a subtle clarity, a quiet form of knowing that moves beneath the surface of daily life. The undervalued sibling carries memory, yes, but also perspective, the ability to see without judgment, to listen without interruption, to understand without insisting. They retain tenderness, sometimes fragile, sometimes fierce. The emotional radar that once protected them from neglect now guides deep empathy. They notice subtleties that others overlook: a pause, a fleeting expression, the unspoken tension between words and intention. What was once survival has become insight. There is a capacity for patience. Time is measured differently, less by immediate recognition and more by the rhythm of experience itself. They understand that validation is transient, attention fleeting, and yet the inner self endures. In this endurance, there is a quiet strength, steady, unassuming, deeply human. They retain curiosity about relationships, about emotion, about themselves. The undervalued sibling has learned to watch, to reflect, and to interpret without urgency. This is not detachment, it is a cultivated wisdom that protects and nurtures simultaneously. What remains is also a deep capacity for authenticity. Having lived much of life in observation, they know how to inhabit their own space fully, without expectation or apology. They speak when necessary, act when necessary, and remain silent when silence itself is the answer. This balance is learned through years of nuance, adaptation, and reflection. The past does not vanish, shadows linger, but the presence of awareness softens them, transforms them into threads that enrich rather than constrain. The sibling carries both vulnerability and strength, the tension between memory and choice, the rhythm of sensitivity, and the steadiness of insight. And so, life is lived with quiet intentionality, not to compensate for absence, not to seek what was denied, but to honor the self that emerged through it all. There is a sense of completion without closure, a recognition that human experience is layered, imperfect, and deeply instructive. The undervalued sibling understands that sensitivity is not weakness. Attentiveness is not subservience. Their worth is inherent, not granted. The gift of invisibility, once a burden, has become a lens through which the subtleties of love, pain, and connection can be observed, appreciated, and respected. And in that observation lies freedom, freedom from comparison, freedom from the emotional economy of childhood, freedom to inhabit life fully, calmly, and with reflective grace. The story ends not with triumph, but with presence. A recognition that being undervalued does not diminish the human spirit, it shapes it, molds it, deepens it. And in the quiet aftermath, the sibling emerges not invisible, not diminished, but awake, whole, attentive, and profoundly human.